President Vladimir Putin has told Kremlin officials that his Alaska visit was both useful and timely. He expressed respect for the US position and highlighted Russia's willingness to peacefully resolve the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, signalling possible flexibility on territorial claims. Let's have a look at what the Russian president had to say.
Попросил вас собраться для того, чтобы проинформировать о результатах нашего визита нашей делегации в Соединенные Штаты, на Аляску. Хочу сразу отметить, что визит был своевременным и весьма полезным. Мы поговорили практически по всем направлениям нашего взаимодействия, но прежде всего, конечно, говорили о возможном разрешении украинского кризиса на справедливой основе. И, конечно, у нас была возможность, что мы сделали, поговорить о генезисе, о причинах этого кризиса. И именно устранение этих первопричин должно быть положено в основу урегулирования. Мы давно напрямую не вели переговоров подобного рода на таком уровне. Повторяю еще раз, была возможность спокойно, детально еще раз изложить нашу позицию. Мы, разумеется, с уважением относимся и к позиции американской администрации, которая видит необходимость скорейшего прекращения боевых действий. Ну и мы тоже этого бы хотели. И хотели бы перейти к решению всех вопросов мирными средствами. Разговор был очень откровенным, содержательным. И, на мой взгляд, это приближает нас к нужным решениям.
Well, these comments come as in a powerful letter, First Lady Melania Trump appeals directly to President Putin, urging him to protect children's innocence and champion global peace. She calls on him to act decisively, saying true leadership lies in safeguarding every child's future beyond borders, politics and ideology. Meanwhile, following the Alaska summit, President Trump urged Ukraine to negotiate with Russia, calling Moscow a very big power. He told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Putin proposed freezing front lines if Kyiv surrendered control of the strategically important Donetsk region. Zelensky said Russia refusing to accept a ceasefire was complicating efforts to end Moscow's more than 3-year-long conflict. He warns that if Moscow won't stop strikes, securing lasting coexistence with neighbours will be even harder. Well, this comes as Ukrainian forces pushed Russian troops back 2 kilometres on the Sumy front amid ongoing fighting near key villages. President Zelensky warns of increased Russian attacks ahead of critical peace talks. Well, in another update from Russia, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held separate talks with Turkish and Hungarian foreign ministers discussing the Alaska summit's outcome. He shared Moscow's perspective on the failed bid to end the Ukraine conflict. Well, a lot of developments, of course, in an extremely multifaceted discussion and talking points as world leaders look at how they can end this Russia-Ukraine conflict. And joining us to discuss that, retired Major General Gigi Doedi, a global strategic defence expert who joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. And let's first look at Donald Trump's comments. He says Russia is a big power, Ukraine is not, and that Ukraine needs to push a deal forward. But Ukraine have been strong in saying they won't concede any land, something that Russia seemingly is pushing for, and the US president now is joining him with. Do you think that this is the only way that the war will end?
Well, Joshua, first and foremost, always a pleasure to be on the NewsX world. Well, you asked a very specific question, and I can give very specific answers. First and foremost, I think this summit at Alaska marks a major step toward the resolution of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, which is on for last 3.5 years. And I think the stated positions are very clear. Firstly, Trump has emerged as a peace negotiator, and he has yielded certain amount of ground to President Putin, and President Putin has gained a fair deal both politically and also as far as the global, his standing is concerned. Now, what exactly has President Trump stated in this? First and foremost, I think President Trump has now adopted a position wherein it is a strategic in nature, not exactly the deal because the deal will take some time to come through. But he has made some very important statement, which actually imply that Ukraine will have to yield a certain ground in case this peace deal is to materialize. That means certain giveaway of the territorial claims. Now, that is one statement which implies that the stronger power can always have better of a weaker opponent. Point number two, what he has stated is that this deal will come with certain guarantees, means that the US could be involved in giving guarantee, security guarantee to Ukraine. The point number three is we also need to understand the larger dynamics, how Europe is playing it out, how the other countries are involved in it. But primarily, I think what it is going to be that in time to come, even Zelensky will be involved because today, without Ukraine, the talks have no meaning because Ukraine is the most affected party. So all I can say is the Trump administration or President Trump has made it clear how this negotiation or settlement can take place. That means certain amount of concession will
Yes.
have to be made by Ukraine, and also possibly Russia also could adopt a flexible position. But all the same, Mr. Trump will like to carry the European Union and others along with it before the deal can be actually made. And my
Yes.
last point is India is a beneficiary because when there is a reduction of tension between Russia and US, then possibly India could escape the 25% extra tariffs, which is a good news for India. Joshua.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've mentioned European nations there. Before we touch on their response, let's briefly look at this letter from Melania Trump directed to President Putin and focusing on the theme of children alongside other points. Do you think that this letter is maybe more of a voice of reason than what Trump's rhetoric has been? And do you think it's trying to focus the conversation on the humanitarian aspect amidst so many diplomatic talks? Of course, there are deaths on the front lines, but also deaths being reported, civilian deaths on both sides.
Absolutely, Joshua. Ironically, in the war, it's the civilians who take the maximum hit because they are unprotected. While the armed forces have certain degree of protection, they have certain degree of immunity because they are fighting on the front line. But the civilians are most exposed, and I think in this case, First Lady Melania's comment merit a deeper consideration because the children, the elderly, the women are all actually the victims of the war. And this war, last 3.5 years, has caused about 1 million casualties, and a couple of 4 to 5 million people have been displaced. The point is that we need to always consider the humanitarian effect that war has, and this actually gets ignored because in the heat of the war. I think this call is very timely, and
Yes.
world must pay attention to this because humanitarian angle is very, very important because they are the one who suffer the maximum. I think this also needs a high degree of consideration while the talks are on, but we need to also focus as to no further, victimization of the civilians take place, and this should be the highest priority. That means that there has to be a cessation of hostilities and reckless bombing of the civilian arenas. I think this should be highest priority. But all I can say, Joshua, is the steps in right direction. The Alaska summit comes at a very timely moment, and I'm sure this lays the groundwork for the further resolution of the conflict, which actually merits highest priority. Joshua.
Yes, absolutely. And retired Major General Gigi Dawedi, you will be staying with us